The gunshots echoed through the night as Josephine O'Malley ran barefoot across the harsh desert terrain, her tattered dress clinging to her trembling body. Blood dripped down her arm from a grazing wound, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the emotional agony tearing through her heart. Behind her lay everything she had ever known: her family home, her possessions, and now the lifeless bodies of her parents, gunned down by the notorious Blackwell Gang over a land dispute that had escalated beyond anyone's predictions. The year was 1878, and the Arizona Territory was as unforgiving as it was vast. Josephine had been hiding in the root cellar when the gang had burst into their homestead. Through the floorboards, she had heard her father's defiant voice, followed by her mother's screams, and then the terrible silence that followed the gunfire. When she finally emerged hours later, the sight that greeted her had left her with only one option: run. Now, with nothing but the torn dress on her back and the silver locket containing her parents' portraits around her neck, she stumbled through the desert, guided only by the pale moonlight. Her throat burned with thirst, and her eyes blurred with tears and exhaustion. She had no destination in mind, just away from the bloodshed, away from the men who would surely return to burn everything to the ground. As dawn broke over the distant mountains, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Josephine's strength finally gave out. Her legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed onto the hard ground, sending a cloud of dust billowing around her. She lay there, chest heaving, wondering if this was how it would end alone in the desert, another unmarked grave in a land that took more than it gave. The sound of approaching hoofbeats roused her from her stupor. Fear shot through her veins like ice water as she scrambled to her feet, searching frantically for somewhere to hide. But the flat, open terrain offered no shelter, and she was too weak to run any further. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the rising sun. Josephine's heart hammered against her ribs as the figure drew nearer, revealing a man atop a sturdy chestnut horse. He wore the typical attire of a cowboy: worn leather boots, dusty denims, a checked shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. "Whoa there!" the man called, pulling his horse to a stop several yards away. He dismounted with fluid grace, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, as if approaching a spooked animal. "You all right, miss?" Josephine stumbled backward, her eyes darting wildly. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse and barely audible. The cowboy raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I mean no harm. Name's Fletcher Dawson. I was riding fence line for the Diamond D Ranch when I spotted you." His eyes, a clear blue like the summer sky, took in her disheveled appearance, the dried blood on her arm, and the wild terror in her gaze. "You're hurt." "I'm fine," Josephine insisted, even as her legs threatened to give way beneath her again. Fletcher took another cautious step forward. "You don't look fine, miss, and forgive my bluntness, but you're out here in the middle of nowhere with—" His gaze swept over her torn dress, the fabric soiled with dirt and blood. "Well, with not much else." Josephine felt the hot flush of embarrassment color her cheeks despite her dire situation. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly acutely aware of her exposure. Fletcher's expression softened with understanding. Without a word, he shrugged off his worn leather vest, then unbuttoned his outer shirt. Underneath, he wore a simple cotton undershirt. He held the shirt out to her. "You can borrow mine for as long as you need," he said simply, his voice gentle and without a trace of judgment. Josephine stared at the offered garment, suspicion warring with desperate need. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "Out here, we help folks in need, or they don't survive," Fletcher replied. "I don't need to know your story to see you need a hand right now." After a moment's hesitation, Josephine reached out and took the shirt, her fingers trembling. "Turn around," she commanded, her voice firmer than she felt. Fletcher obliged without question, turning his back to her, and even taking a few steps away to give her privacy. Josephine quickly pulled the shirt over her tattered dress. It was warm from his body, and carried the scent of leather, horse, and something uniquely masculine. The sleeves hung well past her fingertips, and the hem reached nearly to her knees, but it offered more coverage and comfort than she'd had moments before. "Thank you," she said quietly when she'd finished. Fletcher turned back, his eyes carefully avoiding lingering on her form. "You got a name, miss?" "Josephine. Josephine O'Malley." He nodded, as if committing it to memory. Well, Miss O'Malley, I can't in good conscience leave you out here. The Diamond D is about 5 miles east. We can get you food, water, proper medical attention for that arm, and figure out what to do next. He paused, adding gently, unless you've got somewhere else to go? The question hung in the air between them. Josephine swallowed hard against the lump forming in her throat. She had nowhere. Everyone she loved was gone, and she had no idea who might be looking for her. I don't, she admitted finally, the words nearly choking her. Fletcher nodded, his expression revealing neither pity nor judgment, just calm acceptance. Then the Diamond D it is, at least for now. He approached his horse, running a hand along its neck before turning to Josephine. This is Rusty. He's got a gentle temperament, even with strangers. He offered his hand to help her mount, but Josephine hesitated, eyeing the tall horse warily. I've never ridden before, she confessed. Fletcher's lips quirked in a slight smile. First time for everything, Miss O'Malley. I'll be right behind you, so you won't fall. With reluctance born of necessity, Josephine placed her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but gentle as he helped her onto the saddle. Once she was seated, he swung up behind her with practiced ease, careful to maintain a respectful distance while still securing her safety, with one arm loosely around her waist. Hold on to the saddle horn, he instructed, his breath warm against her ear. And try to relax. Rusty can sense tension. As they set off at an easy trot, Josephine found herself caught between exhaustion and hyper-awareness of the stranger at her back. Fletcher Dawson was everything her parents had warned her about an unknown man in a lawless land. Yet, he had offered her help when she needed it most, and something in his steady gaze told her she could trust him, at least for now. With the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her and the rising heat of the desert sun, Josephine's eyelids grew heavy. Despite her best efforts, she found herself leaning back against Fletcher's solid chest, her head nodding as exhaustion claimed her. Rest, she heard him say, his voice rumbling through his chest against her back. I've got you. And for the first time since the gunshots had shattered her world, Josephine felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. The Diamond D Ranch materialized on the horizon like a mirage, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled against the backdrop of rugged mountains. As they approached, Josephine stirred from her uneasy slumber, momentarily disoriented before the events of the past day came rushing back. She stiffened against Fletcher, who had maintained his respectful distance despite her unconscious leaning. We're almost there, he said, his voice a reassuring rumble. The ranch belongs to Mr. Donovan. He's a fair man. Been like a father to me since I started working here 5 years back. Josephine nodded wordlessly, apprehension tightening her chest. What would these people think of her? A bedraggled woman appearing out of nowhere, wearing a man's shirt over her torn dress, with no possessions and nowhere to go. As they rode into the ranch yard, activity seemed to pause. A few cowboys stopped their work to observe the newcomers, their curious gazes lingering on Josephine. A portly man with silver-streaked hair emerged from what appeared to be the main house, his bushy eyebrows raising at the sight of them. Fletcher, didn't expect you back till sundown, the man called out, his shrewd eyes assessing Josephine. Fletcher dismounted smoothly before helping Josephine down. Her legs nearly buckled as her feet touched the ground, and he steadied her with a firm but gentle hand on her elbow. Mr. Donovan, this is Miss Josephine O'Malley, Fletcher explained. Found her out by the East Ridge. She's hurt and needs help. Douglas Donovan approached, his weathered face softening slightly as he took in Josephine's condition. Miss O'Malley, he greeted with a tip of his hat. Seems you've had a rough time of it. Before Josephine could respond, the ranch house door swung open again, and a woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked dark hair hurried down the steps. She took one look at Josephine and immediately took charge. For heaven's sake, Douglas, the girl's dead on her feet, she chided, moving to Josephine's side. I'm Martha Donovan, dear. Let's get you inside, cleaned up, and that wound tended to. Martha's gentle but no-nonsense manner broke through Josephine's reserve. To her horror, she felt tears welling in her eyes, the enormity of everything she'd lost and everything she'd endured in the past 24 hours crashing down upon her. I'm sorry, she whispered, fighting to maintain her composure. "I don't mean to be a burden." "Nonsense," Martha said firmly, wrapping a supportive arm around Josephine's waist. "There are no burdens here, only folks helping each other through hard times. That's the way of the West." As Martha led her toward the house, Josephine glanced back over her shoulder. Fletcher stood watching, concern evident in his eyes. Their gazes locked for a moment, and he gave her a small nod of reassurance. "Thank you," she mouthed, clutching his borrowed shirt closer around her. Once inside the ranch house, Martha's efficiency took over. She drew a warm bath in a copper tub behind a privacy screen in a small side room, provided clean towels and a simple calico dress that had belonged to her daughter, who was now married and living in Tucson. "It might be a bit loose, but it'll do until we can get you something better," Martha explained as she laid out the garment. Left alone to bathe, Josephine sank into the warm water with a shuddering sigh. She scrubbed away the dirt and blood, wincing as the water stung her wounds. The largest was indeed just a graze along her upper arm, but there were numerous scratches from her flight through the desert underbrush. As she washed, she forced herself not to think about her parents' bodies lying in their own blood, not to remember the sound of her mother's final scream. After dressing in the borrowed clothes, which hung a bit loose but felt like heaven compared to her ruined dress, Josephine emerged to find Martha waiting with bandages and a bottle of iodine. "This will sting," the older woman warned as she cleaned and dressed Josephine's wound. Josephine barely flinched, the physical pain a distant concern compared to the ache in her heart. Once her injuries were tended, Martha led her to the kitchen, where she set a bowl of hearty beef stew before her. "Eat," she instructed kindly. "Then we can talk, if you're up to it." The savory aroma made Josephine realize how long it had been since she'd eaten. She devoured the stew and fresh-baked bread, the simple meal tasting better than any fancy dinner she could remember. As she ate, Martha bustled around the kitchen, keeping up a gentle stream of conversation that required no response. She spoke of the ranch, of their 25 years in the territory, of the changes they'd seen and the hardships they'd endured. Her matter-of-fact tone was soothing, anchoring Josephine to the present and keeping the horrors of the previous night at bay. When she had finished eating, Martha poured them both cups of coffee and settled across from her at the table. "Now, dear," she said gently, "I won't press you to tell me anything you're not ready to share, but it might help to talk about whatever brought you to us." Josephine's hands tightened around her coffee cup. The warmth, the kindness, the simple human connection, it all threatened to unravel the fragile control she'd maintained. "My parents," she began, her voice breaking. She took a deep breath and forced herself to continue. "The Blackwell Gang came to our homestead last night. My father had refused to sell our land to Mr. Blackwell. They shot them both. I was hiding in the root cellar. When they left, I ran." Martha reached across the table and covered Josephine's trembling hand with her own. "Oh, my poor child." "They'll be looking for me," Josephine whispered, the realization dawning with chilling clarity. "If they find out I'm alive, that I witnessed—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "You're safe here," Martha assured her firmly. "Douglas and the boys won't let any harm come to you. And for what it's worth, Fletcher Dawson is one of the finest men I know. He wouldn't have brought you here if he didn't think we could protect you." At the mention of Fletcher, Josephine felt a curious flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. "He was very kind," she acknowledged quietly. "He gave me his shirt when he found me." Martha's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Did he now? Well, that boy was raised right, despite his rough start in life." Before Josephine could inquire about Fletcher's past, the kitchen door opened and Douglas Donovan entered, followed by Fletcher himself. Both men removed their hats as they stepped inside, a gesture of respect that touched Josephine deeply. "Miss O'Malley," Douglas greeted her, "I hope Martha's been taking good care of you." "Yes, sir. Everyone has been very kind." Fletcher's eyes swept over her, taking in the clean clothes and bandaged arm. Some of the tension seemed to leave his shoulders when he saw her looking more comfortable. "Fletcher's told me a bit about your situation," Douglas said, his tone somber. "I want you to know that you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. We've got a spare room, and Martha could use some help around the house." "I can work," Josephine said quickly, eager to show her gratitude. "I can cook and clean and sew. I'm a quick learner for anything else." Douglas nodded approvingly. "That's the spirit. But for now, you need rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about earning your keep. Fletcher, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Mr. Donovan, with your permission, I'd like to ride out to the O'Malley homestead. If the Blackwell Gang left evidence, the law should know. The implication was clear. Her parents deserved a proper burial, and the murders should be reported. Josephine felt a surge of gratitude toward this quiet, thoughtful man. I'll go with you, Douglas decided. Martha, get the spare room ready for Miss O'Malley. Fletcher, we'll leave at first light. As the men turned to leave, Josephine found her voice. Mr. Dawson, she called softly. Fletcher paused, turning back to her with questioning eyes. Your shirt, she said, gesturing to the garment she'd carefully folded and placed on a side table. I should return it. A small smile touched his lips, softening the serious set of his features. Keep it for now, Miss O'Malley. Like I said, for as long as you need. With a tip of his hat, he followed Douglas out, leaving Josephine with a curious warmth spreading through her chest, despite the weight of grief that still pressed upon her. That night, lying in a clean bed in the small but comfortable spare room, Josephine stared at the moonlight, filtering through the curtains. So much had changed in the span of 24 hours. She had lost everything, had run for her life, and had found unexpected kindness in strangers. Particularly in a blue-eyed cowboy who had given her the shirt off his back without hesitation. As exhaustion finally claimed her, Josephine's last conscious thought was of Fletcher Dawson's steady gaze and the curious feeling of safety she'd experienced in his presence. In a world that had suddenly become unpredictable and dangerous, he represented something solid and trustworthy. It wasn't much to cling to, but for now, it was enough. The following weeks settled into an unexpected rhythm at the Diamond D Ranch. After Fletcher and Douglas returned from the O'Malley homestead, with the grim news that her parents had indeed been properly buried and the sheriff notified, Josephine threw herself into work around the ranch. She helped Martha with cooking, cleaning, and mending, grateful for the distraction the tasks provided from her grief and the fear. The sheriff had promised to investigate, but with limited resources and the Blackwell Gang's significant influence in the territory, Josephine harbored few illusions about justice being served. For now, she focused on surviving, on rebuilding some semblance of a life from the ashes of her old one. Fletcher Dawson became a steady presence in her days. Though he spent long hours working with the cattle and maintaining the ranch's fences and buildings, he always found time to check on her well-being. Their interactions were brief but meaningful, a quiet good morning as he collected his coffee before dawn, a few minutes of conversation as they crossed paths in the yard, and offered to teach her to ride properly so she could get around the ranch more easily. It was during those riding lessons that Josephine began to know the man beyond his kindness on that first desperate day. Fletcher was patient and thorough in his instruction, his strong hand steadying her as she learned to mount and dismount, his voice calm as he explained how to communicate with the gentle mare Martha had suggested for her. Horses can sense your feelings, Fletcher explained one golden afternoon as they walked their mounts along the perimeter of the ranch. If you're scared, they get nervous. If you're confident, they trust you. Is that true of people too? Josephine asked, glancing at him from beneath the brim of a borrowed hat. Fletcher considered this, his face thoughtful in the slanting sunlight. Some, I reckon. The good ones, anyway. And are you one of the good ones, Mr. Dawson? The question slipped out before she could reconsider its boldness. His blue eyes met hers, serious but with a warmth that made her breath catch. I try to be, Miss O'Malley. Every day. As June melted into July and the Arizona summer intensified, Josephine found herself watching for Fletcher more often than she cared to admit. There was something about his quiet strength, his unwavering principles, and the gentleness that belied his rough exterior that drew her to him. In the evenings, when the ranch hands gathered on the porch to escape the stifling heat of the bunkhouse, she would sometimes join them, ostensibly to enjoy the cooler air, but really to listen to Fletcher's deep voice as he contributed sparingly to the conversations. It was during one such evening that she learned more about his past. The older ranch hand, Hank, was reminiscing about his days riding with the cavalry. Saw more of this country than most men ever will, Hank was saying. Of course, some of what I saw wasn't pretty, especially during the war. You fought in the Civil War? Josephine asked, genuinely interested in the history this man had lived through. Yes, madam, Hank confirmed. So did Fletcher's pa, though on the Confederate side. Isn't that right, Fletcher? Fletcher nodded, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. He didn't talk about it much when he came home, didn't talk about much of anything by then. The war changed a lot of men, Hank acknowledged soberly. Your pa had it rougher than most, losing your ma while he was away. Josephine's eyes widened at this revelation, her heart aching for the young boy Fletcher must have been, waiting for a father who returned broken. Is that why you came west? She asked softly. Fletcher's gaze met hers across the porch, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes before he schooled his expression. My pa died when I was 16. There wasn't anything left for me in Tennessee, so I headed west. Figured I'd find my own way. And did you? Josephine pressed gently. Find your way? A small smile touched his lips. I found the Diamond D. Found good people who were willing to teach a green boy from the East how to be a proper cowboy. I reckon that's something. The conversation moved on, but Josephine continued to steal glances at Fletcher, seeing him with new eyes. He understood loss, understood having to forge a new path when the old one was violently taken away. Perhaps that was why he had stopped for her that day in the desert. He recognized a kindred spirit. Later that night, unable to sleep in the stifling heat, Josephine slipped outside to sit on the porch steps. The night was alive with the chorus of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. The vast expanse of stars overhead made her feel simultaneously insignificant and part of something grand and eternal. The sound of boots on wood alerted her to another's presence. She turned to find Fletcher approaching, a hesitant look on his face. Mind if I join you? He asked. Josephine nodded, shifting slightly to make room beside her on the step. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both gazing at the star-strewn sky. I still have nightmares, she confessed suddenly, the darkness making it easier to voice her vulnerability. About that night, about what might have happened if I hadn't hidden, or if they'd found me. Fletcher remained quiet, allowing her the space to continue if she wished. Sometimes I feel guilty for being alive when they're not, she added, her voice barely above a whisper. Survivor's guilt, Fletcher said softly. I felt it too, after my pa died. He'd been drinking heavily, fell from his horse on the way home from town. I kept thinking if I'd gone with him, maybe I could have saved him. Could you have? Josephine asked. Probably not. He was a broken man long before that fall. Fletcher sighed, running a hand through his hair. But that's the thing about guilt. It doesn't always listen to reason. Josephine nodded, understanding completely. How did you move past it? I'm not sure you ever really do. Not completely, Fletcher admitted. But one day you realize you've been carrying it so long, your arms are tired. And maybe, just maybe, the people you lost wouldn't want you to keep punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. Tears welled in Josephine's eyes, and she brushed them away quickly. My parents would want me to live, she said, the realization both painful and freeing. They worked so hard to build that homestead, to create a good life. They wouldn't want their deaths to be the end of my story. Fletcher's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused palm warm against her skin. No, they wouldn't. Your story's just beginning, Josephine. It was the first time he'd called her by her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the night air. Thank you, Fletcher, she said, allowing herself the same intimacy. For finding me that day, for bringing me here, for understanding. His fingers tightened briefly around hers before he released her hand. You're stronger than you know, Josephine O'Malley. Don't you forget that. With those words, he rose and bid her good night, disappearing back into the darkness toward the bunkhouse. Josephine remained on the porch a while longer, her hand still tingling from his touch, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. The next morning brought unexpected news. Douglas Donovan received word that the sheriff had indeed arrested 2 members of the Blackwell Gang in connection with the murder of the O'Malleys. However, Jasper Blackwell himself remained free. And there were rumors that he was furious about the arrests and determined to find and eliminate any witnesses. You need to stay close to the ranch, Douglas advised Josephine gravely after sharing the news. No riding out alone, not until this is resolved. Josephine felt the familiar cold grip of fear around her heart, but she nodded resolutely. I understand. I won't put anyone here at risk. No one's worried about risk, girl, Douglas said gruffly. We're worried about you. The concern in his eyes touched her deeply. In just a few short weeks, the people of the Diamond D had become like family to her. Martha treated her like the daughter she missed. Douglas offered fatherly advice, and the ranch hands treated her with respectful camaraderie. And Fletcher had become something else entirely. Something she wasn't quite ready to name, but that made her heart race whenever he was near. Despite the worrying news, life on the ranch continued. July gave way to August, bringing violent thunderstorms that provided brief respites from the relentless heat. During one such storm, Josephine found herself alone in the barn, having volunteered to check on a mare that was close to foaling. The rain hammered against the roof, and lightning illuminated the interior of the barn in brief, brilliant flashes. The pregnant mare was restless, but not yet in labor, pacing her stall with occasional whickers of discomfort. Josephine spoke soothingly to her, stroking her neck and making sure her water trough was full. She was so focused on the horse that she didn't hear the barn door open over the sound of the storm. It wasn't until a flash of lightning revealed a figure standing in the doorway that she gasped and spun around, her heart leaping to her throat. "It's just me!" Fletcher's voice called out, and relief flooded through her. He approached, rain dripping from his hat and shoulders. "Martha was worried about you out here alone with the storm." "I'm fine," Josephine assured him. "Just checking on Daisy. She seems restless, but I don't think she's ready yet." Fletcher moved to the stall, his experienced eyes assessing the mare. "No, not tonight, but soon, maybe tomorrow or the next day." Another crash of thunder rattled the barn, and Josephine couldn't suppress a small jump. Fletcher glanced at her, a smile tugging at his lips. "Not fond of storms?" he asked. "They've never bothered me before," she admitted. "But lately, loud noises." She trailed off, not needing to explain further. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "They take you back to that night." She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. "It's silly. I know a thunderstorm isn't gunfire, but my body doesn't seem to understand the difference." "It's not silly," Fletcher said firmly. "It's how we protect ourselves after something traumatic. Our minds and bodies stay alert, ready to flee from danger." He hesitated, then added quietly, "After my ma died, my pa couldn't stand the sound of a woman singing. Said it reminded him too much of what he'd lost." Josephine's heart ached for the boy Fletcher had been, witnessing his father's grief. "Does it get better?" she asked. "Yes," he assured her, "with time and with new memories to replace the painful ones." Another flash of lightning illuminated the barn, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. This time, both Josephine and the mare started, the horse whinnying in distress. Without thinking, Josephine moved closer to Fletcher, seeking comfort in his solid presence. He seemed to understand her need, opening his arm in silent invitation. She stepped into his embrace, breathing in the now familiar scent of leather and horses that clung to him. "I've got you," he murmured, echoing the words he'd spoken that first day. "You're safe." They stood like that as the storm raged around them, his arm a protective circle around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. It was improper, she knew, to be so close to a man who wasn't family or her husband. But in that moment, propriety seemed less important than the comfort and security his presence provided. When the storm began to abate, the thunder growing more distant, Josephine reluctantly pulled away. "We should get back to the house before Martha sends out a search party," she said with a small smile. Fletcher nodded, but he made no move to leave. Instead, he reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather-light, but sent a jolt of awareness through her entire body. "Josephine," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I want you to know that whatever happens with Blackwell, whatever you decide to do once this is all over, you have a place here, with all of us." She heard what he wasn't saying with me. The realization that he might care for her as more than just someone in need of help made her breath catch. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes locked with his. "That means more than I can say." For a heartbeat, She thought he might lower his head to hers, might close the small distance between them. Her heart thundered in her chest, rivaling the storm outside. But then he stepped back, breaking the moment. "We should head back," he said, his voice steadier now, though his eyes still held an intensity that made her flush. As they hurried through the rain toward the main house, Josephine couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since that desperate morning in the desert. She had lost everything, had run with only the clothes on her back, and yet somehow she had found not just shelter and safety, but the possibility of something she had never expected, a new beginning, and perhaps even love. The days that followed the stormy night in the barn brought a subtle shift in Josephine's relationship with Fletcher. Though neither spoke of the moment they had shared, there was a new awareness between them, evident in lingering glances across the dinner table and the way their hands would sometimes brush as they worked side by side. Martha noticed, of course, little escaped her keen eyes, but she said nothing, merely hiding her smile behind her coffee cup when Fletcher volunteered a bit too quickly to help Josephine with some task. September arrived, bringing slightly cooler temperatures and the culmination of Josephine's riding lessons. She had progressed from tentative walks around the corral to confident trots along the ranch trails, always with Fletcher by her side. Her confidence grew with each ride, not just in her horsemanship, but in her sense of belonging at the Diamond D. It was during one such ride, as they paused atop a small rise overlooking the ranch, that Fletcher finally broached the subject they'd been dancing around. "You've come a long way since I found you in the desert," he observed, watching as she competently controlled her mare with minimal effort. Josephine smiled, appreciating his acknowledgement of her progress. "I had a good teacher." "You had determination," Fletcher countered. "That's worth more than any teaching." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, gazing out at the sprawling landscape. The Diamond D's cattle grazed in the valley below, while in the distance the mountains stood sentinel against the azure sky. "Do you ever think about moving on?" Fletcher asked suddenly, his voice carefully neutral. "Now that you've got your strength back, your confidence, you could go anywhere, start fresh where no one knows about. What happened?" The question caught Josephine off guard. She turned to study his profile, noting the tension in his jaw. "Are you asking if I want to leave the Diamond D?" Fletcher kept his eyes on the horizon. "I'm asking what you want, Josephine, not what you've settled for because you had no choice that day." Understanding dawned, warming her from within. He was giving her an out, making sure she didn't feel obligated to stay just because he and the Donovans had helped her. "When I first came here, I was simply grateful to be alive," she began carefully. "I didn't think beyond the next day, the next hour sometimes. But now," she paused, gathering her courage. "Now, I can't imagine being anywhere else. The Diamond D isn't just a safe haven anymore. It's home." Fletcher's eyes finally met hers, hope kindling in their blue depths. "And the people?" Josephine's heart raced, but she didn't look away. "The people are the reason it feels like home, especially one person in particular." A slow smile spread across Fletcher's face, transforming his usually serious expression. "Is that so, Miss O'Malley?" "It is, Mr. Dawson," she confirmed, her own smile matching his. Fletcher shifted in his saddle, turning more fully toward her. "Josephine, I'm not a man of many words, and I don't have much to offer, except hard work and honest intentions. But these past months, watching you rebuild your life with such courage, it's made me see what kind of woman you are, and I find myself hoping that maybe, when you're ready, you might consider—" The crack of a rifle shot cut through the air, sending birds scattering from nearby trees. Fletcher's horse reared in alarm, and Josephine struggled to control her own startled mount. "Get down!" Fletcher shouted, already dismounting and pulling his rifle from its scabbard. Heart pounding, Josephine slid from her saddle, crouching low beside her horse. Another shot rang out, kicking up dirt just yards from where they stood. "We need to get back to the ranch," Fletcher said urgently, his eyes scanning the surrounding terrain for the shooter. "Stay low. Use the horses for cover. When I say go, mount up and ride hard. Don't stop for anything, you hear me?" Fear clawed at Josephine's throat, but she nodded. Gathering her reins in trembling hands, Fletcher fired a couple of shots in the direction of the attacker, then shouted, "Now!" They swung into their saddles simultaneously and spurred their horses down the slope, away from the unseen threat. Josephine bent low over her mare's neck, urging the animal to greater speed as more shots echoed behind them. The thundering of hooves told her that at least one rider was in pursuit. Fletcher stayed slightly behind her, protecting her flank. "Keep going!" he called as they thundered toward the ranch buildings, now visible in the distance. A shout from the ranch yard indicated that their arrival had been noticed. Douglas Donovan and several ranch hands emerged, rifles at the ready. As they neared the safety of the buildings, a final shot whistled past Josephine's ear. She heard Fletcher grunt in pain, but didn't dare look back until they had reached the protective circle of armed men. Pulling her horse to a stop, she whirled around to see Fletcher slumping in his saddle, crimson staining his left shoulder. "Fletcher!" she cried, dismounting so quickly she nearly fell. Two ranch hands helped Fletcher down, while others kept their rifles trained on the ridge they had fled from. Douglas grabbed Fletcher's reins and Josephine's arm, hustling them toward the barn. "Inside now," he ordered. "Hank, get Martha. Tell her to bring her medical kit." Once inside the relative safety of the barn, Josephine rushed to Fletcher's side as the men eased him onto a hay bale. His face was pale beneath his tan, but his eyes were alert. "Just a graze," he insisted through gritted teeth, as Josephine frantically examined the bloody tear in his shirt. "Don't you dare lie to me, Fletcher Dawson," she scolded, tears threatening to spill despite her efforts to remain calm. "Let me see how bad it is." With gentle but firm hands, she peeled back the blood-soaked fabric. The bullet had indeed grazed his shoulder, cutting a deep furrow, but not lodging in the flesh. Still, it was bleeding freely and needed immediate attention. Martha burst into the barn moments later, medical kit in hand. "Move aside, Josephine. Let me see him." Reluctantly, Josephine stepped back, allowing Martha to assess and clean the wound with practiced efficiency. Douglas joined them, his weathered face grim. "It was Blackwell's men," Fletcher said, wincing as Martha applied antiseptic to the wound. "Has to be. They were waiting, like they knew we'd be riding that trail." Douglas nodded soberly. "They've been watching the ranch then. This isn't just about finding a witness anymore. This is a siege." Josephine's stomach churned with guilt and fear. "This is my fault. I've brought this danger to all of you." "Nonsense," Martha said firmly, not looking up from her work. "Jasper Blackwell has been looking for an excuse to move against the Diamond D for years. He wants this land, and Douglas won't sell." "Martha's right," Douglas confirmed. "This is about more than you, Josephine, though I reckon finding you is a bonus in Blackwell's eyes. He's been trying to drive out smaller ranchers all over the territory, consolidate the land under his control." Fletcher reached out with his good arm, catching Josephine's hand in a firm grip. "This isn't your fault," he said forcefully, his blue eyes intense with conviction. "And we're not going to let Blackwell win, not with the land, and not with you." The determination in his voice steadied her, even as worry for him and the others at the Diamond D gnawed at her insides. These people had become her family, had taken her in when she had nothing. Now they were in danger because of it, and Fletcher had been hurt protecting her. "What do we do?" she asked, looking between Douglas and Fletcher. "We fight," Douglas said simply. "We protect what's ours." As night fell over the ranch, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. The women and children of the few married ranch hands were gathered in the main house, while the men established a defensive perimeter around the buildings. Josephine refused to remain inside, insisting on helping Martha prepare food and coffee for the men standing watch. Fletcher, his shoulder bandaged but his determination undiminished, stationed himself on the porch with a rifle across his lap. When Josephine brought him coffee, he patted the space beside him in silent invitation. "You should be resting," she chided gently, settling next to him. "I'll rest when Blackwell is no longer a threat," he replied, his eyes never ceasing their vigilant scan of the darkness beyond the ranch yard. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension of the day's events and the uncertain future hanging between them. "I'm sorry we were interrupted earlier," Fletcher said finally, his voice low. "Before the shooting started, I was trying to tell you something important." Josephine's heart quickened. "I remember." Fletcher turned to her then, his face half illuminated by the lamplight spilling from the window behind them. "I don't have pretty words, Josephine, but I need you to know that my feelings for you run deeper than just wanting to protect you or help you. I admire your courage, your determination, the way you've built a new life from nothing, and I find myself hoping that when this is all over, you might consider building that life with me." Despite the danger surrounding them, or perhaps because of it, Josephine felt a surge of clarity and certainty. Life was precarious, especially in this wild territory. Happiness should be seized when found, not deferred for some safer time that might never come. "Fletcher Dawson," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions coursing through her, "I would be honored to build a life with you, wherever that may lead us." The smile that lit his face was like sunrise breaking over the desert, warm, radiant, and full of promise. He leaned toward her, his intent clear, and Josephine met him halfway. Their first kiss was gentle, a tender promise in the midst of uncertainty. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and she leaned into his touch, savoring the warmth and security it represented. When they parted, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he whispered, "I'm going to do this properly, ask you properly, with a ring and everything a woman deserves." Josephine smiled, her heart full despite the danger that lurked in the darkness. "I don't need proper, Fletcher. I just need you." A shout from the bunkhouse broke the moment. "Riders coming. At least 5 men approaching from the east." Fletcher was on his feet instantly, rifle at the ready. "Get inside," he told Josephine urgently. "No," she refused, standing her ground. "I won't hide while everyone else risks their lives. I can shoot, my father taught me. Give me a gun." Fletcher looked as if he might argue, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. With a curt nod, he handed her a revolver from his belt. "Stay behind me," he instructed, "and don't shoot unless you have to." The riders approached the edge of the ranch yard, barely visible in the moonlight. The lead figure called out, his voice carrying across the tense silence. "Douglas Donovan, send out the O'Malley girl, and we'll leave your ranch standing." Douglas stepped forward, his rifle aimed steadily at the intruders. "You're trespassing, Blackwell. This is private property, and the lady is under my protection." Jasper Blackwell's laugh was cold and mocking. "Protection? You can't protect her or yourself. I've got 20 men surrounding this place. By dawn, there won't be anything left of the Diamond D but ashes." "Then I reckon we've got nothing to lose by putting up a fight," Douglas replied evenly. "And just so you know, I sent word to the sheriff this afternoon. He's bringing a posse, should be here by morning." "The sheriff," Blackwell scoffed. "That old fool doesn't have the backbone to stand against me." A new voice spoke up from the darkness behind Blackwell, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of multiple rifles being cocked. "Is that so, Jasper?" Sheriff Thomas Collins emerged from the shadows, a dozen armed men at his back. "Seems you're surrounded now, Blackwell." "Drop your weapons, all of you." Confusion and anger flashed across Blackwell's face as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. His men shifted nervously, clearly not expecting this turn of events. "This is none of your concern, Collins," Blackwell snarled. "This is between me and Donovan." "Murder is my concern," the sheriff replied coldly. "I've got 2 of your boys in my jail who've decided to talk rather than hang. They've got quite a tale about the O'Malley killings and several other accidents that have befallen folks who wouldn't sell to you." Josephine stepped forward, moving to stand beside Fletcher. "And I can identify the men who killed my parents," she called out clearly. "I saw everything from the root cellar." Blackwell's eyes narrowed as he spotted her. "You should have stayed hidden, girl." "I'm done hiding," Josephine declared, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "And I'm done running." For a tense moment, it seemed Blackwell might order his men to fight anyway. But outnumbered and caught by surprise, even he could see the futility. With a curse, he threw down his gun. "This isn't over, Donovan," he threatened as the sheriff's men moved in to disarm and restrain him and his gang. "A man like me has friends in high places." "Maybe so," Sheriff Collins acknowledged, "but even friends in high places can't ignore multiple murder charges with witnesses willing to testify." He nodded respectfully to Josephine. "Miss O'Malley, I'll need your statement, but it can wait until morning. You folks have had enough excitement for one night." As the sheriff's posse led the prisoners away, the tension that had gripped the Diamond D began to dissipate. Martha emerged from the house, tears of relief streaming down her weathered cheeks as she embraced her husband. The ranch hands clapped each other on the back, the release of pent-up fear manifesting in nervous laughter and enthusiastic congratulations. Amidst the celebration, Fletcher turned to Josephine, his eyes searching her face. "You were incredibly brave," he said softly, "standing up to Blackwell like that." "I had something worth being brave for," she replied, her eyes never leaving his. "Someone worth fighting for." Fletcher's smile was tender as he drew her into his arms, mindful of his injured shoulder. "I promised you a proper proposal when this was over," he reminded her, "but I find I don't want to wait another minute." Before she could respond, he sank to one knee before her, taking her hand in his. The conversations around them quieted as everyone turned to watch. "Josephine O'Malley," Fletcher said, his voice clear and certain, "when I found you in the desert that day, all I could offer you was a shirt off my back and a safe place to rest. Now, I'm offering you my heart, my name, and everything I am or ever will be. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Josephine's vision as she looked down at this man who had saved her in more ways than he could ever know. "Yes," she whispered, then louder so everyone could hear. "Yes, Fletcher Dawson, I will marry you." As he rose to his feet and gathered her in his arms, the cheers of the Diamond D family surrounded them. In that moment, with Fletcher's heartbeat strong and steady against her own, Josephine knew that the journey that had begun in terror and loss had led her exactly where she was meant to be. 3 months later, on a crisp December day, Josephine O'Malley became Mrs. Fletcher Dawson in a simple ceremony at the Diamond D Ranch. Martha had sewn her a beautiful white dress with lace trim, ordered specially from Tucson, and Douglas had given her away with tears in his eyes, declaring that she had become the daughter he and Martha had always wanted. The trial of Jasper Blackwell and his gang had concluded the week before, with justice finally served for the murder of Josephine's parents and several other crimes. With that chapter of her life closed, Josephine was free to begin anew, no longer looking over her shoulder in fear. After the ceremony, as friends and neighbors celebrated with food and music in the festively decorated barn, Fletcher led his new bride outside to the porch where they had shared their first kiss. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Josephine unwrapped it carefully to reveal a neatly folded blue-checked shirt, the very one he had given her that day in the desert, now cleaned and mended. "You kept it all this time?" she asked, touched by the sentiment. Fletcher's smile was tender as he ran a finger along her cheek. "I told you it was yours for as long as you needed it. Turns out, I need you for much longer than that, for the rest of my days, in fact." "Well, Mr. Dawson," Josephine said, wrapping her arms around his neck, "I believe that can be arranged." As they sealed their promise with a kiss, the setting sun bathed the Diamond D Ranch in golden light. From desperate flight to newfound love, from loss to belonging, Josephine's journey had come full circle. She had fled with only the clothes on her back, but what she had found, a home, a family, and a love born of kindness and courage, was worth more than anything she had left behind. 5 years later, the Diamond D Ranch flourished under the combined care of the Donovans and the Dawsons. Fletcher and Josephine had built a small house of their own on the property, though they still took most meals with Douglas and Martha in the main house. Their family had grown to include 3-year-old twins, Douglas and Margaret, named for the people who had become like parents to both Fletcher and Josephine, and a 6-month-old baby boy they had named William, after Josephine's father. On the anniversary of the day Fletcher had found Josephine in the desert, they always rode out together to the spot where they had first met. This year was no different, except that they left the children in Martha's capable care, making it a rare outing just for the two of them. As they reached the now familiar location, Josephine dismounted and stood gazing across the vast landscape. So much had changed since that desperate morning, when she had collapsed here, certain her life was over. Fletcher joined her, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her close against his side. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Dawson?" Josephine smiled up at him, still marveling at how the years had only deepened her love for this steadfast, honorable man. "I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't ridden by that day, if you hadn't stopped for a bedraggled stranger. I like to think fate had a hand in it," Fletcher mused, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "I was supposed to be checking the north fence line that morning, but something told me to ride this way instead." "Then I'm grateful for that something," Josephine said softly. and for the kind of man who would give a desperate woman the shirt off his back without hesitation. Fletcher's laugh was warm as he pressed a kiss to her temple. Best decision I ever made, even if I did have to ride back to the ranch half naked. The ranch hands never let you forget that, did they? Josephine teased, remembering the good-natured ribbing Fletcher had endured when the story came out. Worth every joke, Fletcher assured her, turning her in his arms to face him fully. I'd give you the shirt off my back 1,000 times over. Josephine Dawson. As they stood together in the desert that had witnessed both the darkest and brightest moments of their lives, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a safe haven, but a true home in Fletcher's love. From the ashes of tragedy, they had built something beautiful and enduring, a life filled with love, family, and the quiet joy of belonging exactly where they were meant to be. And it had all begun with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy offering his shirt to a woman who had nothing, expecting nothing in return but the chance to help someone in need. That shirt, carefully preserved in a cedar chest in their home, was more than just a piece of clothing. It was the beginning of their story, a tangible reminder that sometimes the greatest journeys begin in the darkest moments, and the most precious treasures can be found when we have nothing left to lose.